Got another quick lens video I thought I'd do. This time I'm going to look at the Nikon 50mm f1.8G. Had this lens for a while now and it's quite a popular lens still, so I thought I'd make this video just to give you an idea of what you can expect. Some of the key features and spec, I've put that up on screen for you. Styling and body design very similar to the other 1.8 series lenses that Nikon do with the affordable primes. You have the focus switch on the side. Materials are plastic, but they do feel reasonably decent in terms of density. Focus ring is a hard rubber, it's not plastic. When it is focusing, the elements do move forward quite a bit. That has implications for the focus breathing, as you can see in this quick clip. Nice to see that we do have a metal mount, even though it's a fairly affordable lens. There is a gasket which prevents dust and moisture getting in, but obviously it isn't a weather sealed lens. Mechanical aperture control, there are 7 blades in there. Pleased to see that you also get a hood included, the HB47. I don't use the hood much myself, but it is handy to have in some situations. That's because the front elements are recessed quite a bit. Compared to the D series 50mm, this is a larger lens, though it's still fairly compact and it's also pretty light. Here's the focus distance scale. Believe it or not, I do use this, it is quite handy. And you'll notice if you keep turning that the ring does continue around. If you do get one of these with a pouch, it is handy enough. I tend to use these in bags sometimes just to keep the lens in place, or if I'm storing it somewhere else. It's certainly a lot nicer than the mirrorless wrap things that Nikon give you nowadays. Let's have a look at the focus speed and the sound that the lens makes. As you can see, it is quite fast in terms of focus speed. There is a bit of noise. I'd call it quiet rather than silent, but it is quite a bit quieter than the screwdriver lenses. We'll do some optical tests now. First off with the vignetting. There is a moderate amount of that wide open at 1.8, and once you stop the lens down, going from f2 to 2.8, you can see that it does clear up quite a bit. From about f4 onwards, it's pretty much a non-issue in terms of the corner darkening. There's a bit more distortion on this lens than you might expect for a 50mm. I'll just put the grid lines up there just to show you, so it's not a huge issue in real world use, but it is something to consider. We'll have a look at the resolution of the lens now, and this is a shot which I've done on a D800, so we're up to 36 megapixels. It's pretty good wide open, to be honest, at 1.8. It does improve when you stop down, as you would expect, but I've certainly got no problems at all using this wide open. I don't see any difference between f4 and smaller apertures, certainly in the middle. I find that to be quite a satisfactory performance, considering we're also on a higher resolution body. Situation in the corners is there's a bit of blurring in the extreme corners and edges, wide open. This gradually improves. By about f5.6 it seems to reach the optimal aperture. I don't see any big difference between 5.6 and f8. We'll have a look at some of the chromatic aberrations now, because it's fairly typical with a fast prime lens that you get out of focus areas which have different colours. Because we've got that aspherical element with this lens, it seems to have done a better job of correcting that. You do still have a bit of fringing. It typically shows up sort of a green and a magenta. It's possible to correct this. I've done a quick correction, automatic correction in software, which got rid of most of it. It also clears up when you start to stop the lens down. I haven't found it to be a big problem with this lens. It's certainly better corrected than some of the older lenses out there. The Nikkor does very well with flare control. It's very difficult to get this lens to flare in any significant way. I did try quite hard. Couple of tiny little spots, and that was really about it, even in direct sunlight. We'll move on to the outer focus areas, or the blur or rendering, and this lens is quite good in most respects, particularly if you are at medium to closer distances. Most of these 50mm are quite similar in design, and the aspherical element doesn't seem to have a negative effect in terms of what's going on in the background. That's not the case with every lens. Some of them can be affected by that element. I have used it quite a bit at different apertures as well. I don't always shoot wide open. Even stopping it down, it's pretty good in terms of the smoothness of the background. But there are a few times when it can be a little bit busier and a bit edgy, which is typical for a lot of 50mm lenses, particularly at longer distances. I have seen worse, but there is a bit of double outlining there in the distance. And here's another shot. This time it's wide open on the bench, and you can see a bit more edginess in terms of the outer focus areas. Whether or not you're going to notice these problems really depends greatly on the aperture and the distance to subject. I can't think of too many pictures that I've taken where I found the outer focus areas to be distracting or poorly rendered. With light source rendering, you can see it's quite smooth around the outside. There's no obvious onion rings or anything like that going on. You do have that sort of cat eye effect in the corner, which is very common with the vignetting. The 7 blades which are curved help it hold its circular shape a bit better than some of the straight blade versions. As with most 50mm lenses, it doesn't really focus that close. The performance wide open is okay, it's not too bad. It does improve once you stop the lens down slightly. There's nothing too different here compared to most 50mm lenses. They don't really focus that close. I'll give you a few sample shots now using the lens and a few of my thoughts. I like the 50mm focal length myself. I know some people don't particularly care for it much, but I find it a very useful general purpose focal length. You can also use it for portraiture on a full frame or on a crop sensor camera. Obviously you get a different look to the images than you would do with a longer lens or a wider angle. It's also pretty handy for candid shooting because it isn't a big lens. It doesn't stick out much and draw attention to itself. And of course when you're carrying it around with your other gear, you're not going to take up much space with this in the bag. There are some alternatives to this. You do have the 1.8D. That is still a pretty decent lens. That's a screw drive version. And the 1.4 is also pretty cheap now on the used market, although the general consensus seems to be that the 1.8 is optically somewhat better. There are a few premium 50mm lenses out there. They are the 1.4 ones, and they're pretty big and heavy, though there are some advantages in terms of their optical performance. You can also use this lens with the FTZ adapter as it has a built-in focus motor. It's definitely worth having one of these in the bag, particularly for low light situations or general purpose shooting. I do hope you found the video useful. If you've got any thoughts or questions, do drop a comment down below.